is Justin Halleck. I'm one of the pastors on staff here. I'm so glad to be here with you today. We are in full swing of Christmas. For my family, for many, many years, we were we didn't start celebrating Christmas until after Thanksgiving. Right? Like this would be the weekend, we'd go get our tree, we had like a whole tradition, we'd go pick out a tree, and like a live tree. One year we cut down the tree, that was a disaster, but like it was still just part of the experience, and we get covered in sap, we decorated the house, smells incredible, and we were just like, what are these people doing that are, decorating earlier than things, like, what about Thanksgiving? We're just very like, kind of snooty, is that the word? I'm not sure. Some of you relate, and some of you are in that camp. And then something changed. We got a artificial tree. It's not a fake tree, it's an artificial Christmas tree. And suddenly we weren't so gung-ho about only celebrating Christmas, after Thanksgiving. And slowly Christmas began to seep back for our family. And so some of you are like, can relate to this. Some of you you're looking and look down on me for this, but we actually put our Christmas tree up like 2 weeks ago. All right? And some of you are like, why'd you wait so long? Because some of you, I know, we have a couple people on staff that November 1st, their Christmas tree goes up. Like Halloween comes down, their Christmas tree goes up, and they're just celebrating. And if you're in the room, I really apologize. I don't know who you are, but I heard about somebody who actually put up their Christmas tree mid-October, like 2 weeks before Halloween was over. And I thought, whoa, I don't know how I feel about that. I would like to see it, I'll tell you that. I'd like to go trick-or-treating at the house, like kids knocking on the door, trick-or-treat, they open up and it's Christmas inside. That's all sorts of confusing, isn't it? I guess you give out candy canes. I'm not real sure how that all works out, but we can all agree now, today, we are safe celebrating Christmas, and we are in our Christmas season. And so we're starting a Christmas series. And our Christmas series this year is called The Missing Piece. And the reason we're talking about this and over the next couple weeks is because Christmas is incredibly busy, isn't it? I mean, as much as we want it to be like just very nostalgic and very kind of perfect, it can be a very busy season. And a lot of the things about Christmas that make it busy for my family are not things that we're choosing. Oftentimes it's things that are like being put upon us. It might be classroom parties, it might be just maybe it's our small group getting together, like just various things that just hit our calendar and kind of clog the whole thing up. Busyness, we could talk about business, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that when you get into these situations, you kind of come in contact with people who are not like you, people that you would normally not hang out with on a regular basis, and you get to see some different personality types that you would normally not get to see. For instance, work parties, my work party is here, right? So I get it's a little different. But my wife's work party, she's a teacher, and I'm like, oh, they're teachers. So kind. We probably make crafts. No. And teachers are wild, y'all. And they're doing like the teacher thing, and then I'm like the plus one, and it tends to be like a lot of ladies at her school. She's at elementary school. And so I'm with like all the other plus ones, like a bunch of husbands, and we're just kind of meandering around the hors d'oeuvre table discussing like, is this made with full fat cream cheese or half like fat? Like we're just making up things. And then as you're talking over the course of time, some opinions come to the surface, and you're like, oh wow, can we be friends? Like, I don't know if I can interact with you, right? Or there are other times in our families, we get together with our families, and you guys just had round one this past week, many of you, and you're gearing up for round two later on in December with Christmas, and that can be a whole thing, can it? Because, it's like you get together with your family, your aunts and uncles and cousins, and everyone's together, and it's like, man, we're so glad Meemaw's here. We don't know how many more Christmases we're gonna have with her, but also we're a little nervous about what Meemaw's gonna say, and who we're gonna have to apologize to for what she says. And your uncle just turned on cable news, and you're like, oh, that's gonna be a whole thing. And you normally like to host Christmas, because if you're being honest, you're a little controlling, but you also clean for a week and a half. And then your nieces and nephews show up and they destroy your house due to bad parenting. We can all agree, right? And but they would not do that if I wouldn't. So you're like, we're not gonna do it. So you go to someone else's house and they're hosting, and you're like, okay, this is okay. I can deal with this. But then you notice your sister-in-law, and she's making Thanksgiving dinner, and you're like, where'd you get that recipe? She's like, I found it on TikTok. You're like, oh no, we should not try out recipes that we find on TikTok for Christmas dinner. Right? And you're watching her pour cornflakes all over the sweet potatoes, and you're like, what are you doing? The only way you do sweet potatoes is with little tiny marshmallows. We know this. And it can be very tumultuous. It can be hard. And so we're going to, over the course of the next couple weeks, we're going to be looking each week at a different person or a different personality, a different person that we come in contact with that has the potential to really steal our peace in this season. And today we're talking about, and I don't know if I drew the short straw or what, it's a hard one. Today we're talking about, and I think it's, for me, this is probably the person over the course of years that has maybe made me lose the most sleep because it is a hard situation. And that is a person that does not know Jesus, a lost person. We come in contact with those people. And if you're sitting in the room today and you were invited by a friend, you're like, I don't believe in Jesus, and you're talking about me like I'm not in the room, I apologize, right? You're going to get a little bit of an inside look into Christians today, and hopefully you'll get something out of this as well. But for those of us that call ourselves Christians, there's no getting around the fact that Christmas is an overtly Christian holiday. That's what it is. And if we oftentimes the story of Jesus is called the greatest story ever told, and Christmas is the beginning of the greatest story ever told. You can't really skip over it. And what we're really celebrating when we celebrate Christmas is not all the things, not the tree, and it's not all that. We're celebrating the incarnation. We're celebrating the incarnation. And that's God becoming flesh. That's not the little powdered drink that you mix in that carnation instant breakfast. It's like the incarnation, right? Well, what that is God leaving heaven to come to earth in the form of Jesus, emptying himself, setting aside himself to be like us, to be with us, to walk among us. That's why Jesus came, to feel what we feel, to know what it is to be hungry, to know what it is to be sad, to laugh, to hang out, to all the things, know what it is to be cold and hot, just to be like us and understand us and be with us and then eventually die on the cross for our sins. That's what we're celebrating when we're celebrating Christmas. But the tension comes when we're sitting and we're celebrating Christmas with someone who does not believe the story of what we're celebrating. There's a tension there. There's a real tension because if Christmas is the greatest story ever told, for those people, Christmas is just a story. It's not the greatest story ever told, it's just a story. And it's just fun. I remember in high school, I was talking to a friend and I said, what are you doing this weekend? We're just like chit-chatting. Oh, we're going to pick out a Christmas tree. We're going to get our stockings. And I was like, oh, wait, aren't you Jewish? And they're like, yeah. I was like, are you Jewish and Christian? They're like, no. Like, what? And they're like, yeah, it's so fun. Like, we didn't want to miss out on the tree and the whole thing. And I was like, oh, Christmas for you is just like the 4th of July. It's just something fun that we're doing, right? And we find ourselves in family gatherings, and we find ourselves in gatherings with other people, with people who are celebrating Christmas alongside of us, but they're not celebrating really the same thing that we're celebrating. And there can be a tension there. And in one instance, you have people who, they're like not just non-Christian, they're actually like anti-Christian. They're like, I was in a family gathering one time, and I sat down and I was eating pancakes. I don't know why that matters, but I'm just letting you know that's what I was having. I was sitting down, I'm eating pancakes, and one of my family members had a boyfriend invited to the family gathering. So I sit down, I'm like groggy, I'm tired. I sit down, I'm like trying to put a bite into my mouth, and this gentleman begins to say, hey, you know about Jesus? Jesus, everything you read in the Bible is not true. And Jesus, he actually went to India. And that's where he spent years in India, and he was like just going on. And I'm just like listening, and I'm like, oh wow, everything you're saying is wrong. Like, I don't even know where to begin. Like, everything you're saying is so wrong, it's like talking to an Ohio State football fan. Like everything's wrong. They're just not, the reality is not there. You know what I mean? Like, the reality of the situation is not there. And we're talking, and I'm thinking, okay, we're having this conversation because he knows I'm a pastor. Someone told him I'm a pastor. And so he wants to get into this with me. So I'm like, I'm just listening, And then he's like, oh, so what do you do for a living? I was like, oh, you don't know I'm a pastor. You're just leading with this conversation. Okay. And so we have those situations, right? Where the people we come in contact, they're like hostile to Christianity. We're trying to celebrate Christmas with people who are hostile to the idea of Christmas. And that can steal your peace. right? That can be troublesome. You want to do things, you want to celebrate Christmas, you want to celebrate the birth of your Savior, and it's like, well, no, we don't want to talk about that. We're going to be mocking of you. That's hard. I think what's even harder, and this is the part that is the worst part for me that steals my peace even more than anything else, it are the family members, not the people that are like, you're like, oh, wow, I don't know if I want to spend much time with you, and you're pretty harsh you're not open to these things, but it's the people who we really actually love deeply and we care about deeply, and it's the people that we want to, like, given the opportunity, we'd spend as much time with them as possible. But we know they don't know Jesus, and they don't have a relationship with Jesus. We have peace because we know Jesus, but they are missing that piece. And because they're missing that piece, the thought of being without them for eternity, that keeps you up at night. It might be your kids, grandkids, cousin, uncle, just might be your neighbor, but it's someone you care about and it's someone you love. And you're just like, yeah, it feels like we're going through the motions on this Christmas thing, and I just don't know how to bring up the topic. Like families have rules sometimes where they're like, we don't talk about two things. We don't talk about politics, and we do not talk about religion. And it's like, well, shouldn't we talk about like some religion? We're talking about a religious holiday, but it's just hard to walk through that. And so what do you do with that? And that's what we kind of want to dive into today. What do you do with that in that situation? Because it's just really, 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 really difficult. And so Christmas in and of itself, and as I've been thinking through this, I think Christmas actually informs us a little bit about how to approach this situation. And so I'm about to give you a word that's not a word. It's a made-up word, but it makes sense, and you'll see it. So we talked about the incarnation, that when we're celebrating Christmas, we're actually celebrating the incarnation. We're celebrating God coming to earth in the form of Jesus to be with us, to know us, to be like us, to understand us, right? And so what I'm proposing that we do today, we're going to kind of look at some scripture verses, some things to the New Testament, and kind of flesh some of this and how we can do this out, is I'm proposing that we do just that. Do what God did for us, we do that for others. And so practice some incarnational ministry. Again, not a word, made up. If you put it in your phone, it's going to put a little red line underneath it, right? Incarnational ministry. But the principle is 100% solid because, and I did student ministry. I'll give you an example. When you think about your family members, I have a hard time like processing, how do I do that? But in student ministry, I worked in student ministry for years and years and years. And I can remember being like 22, and I thought I was cool, and I got around some teenagers, and I immediately realized, oh no, my years of coolness are over. Like, I'm not cool. They didn't think I was cool. And pretending to be a teenager as a student pastor does not work very well. They just are like, what are you doing? It doesn't make any sense. And so this concept of, I'm gonna be incarnational to them. So for teenagers, I'm gonna listen to their music. I'm gonna understand what they like. I'm gonna understand the fashions. I'm gonna watch the TV shows. I'm gonna do all the things to help understand the culture. I'm gonna understand the language, memes, all that kind of stuff in order to be able to connect. Not to be a teenager, but simply to help them know that, hey, I understand you, I wanna connect with you, and I respect you, right? And it is fun this past week for Thanksgiving, we were sitting around and my nephews were there and my brother-in-law was there, and one of my nephews said something and he said, no cap. Some of you know what that means. A lot of you don't, right? And I was like, oh, okay. And he's like, and my brother-in-law kind of got, he's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, no cap, Dad. And it was like, I don't understand what you mean, right? There's a disconnect there. So I was like, okay, we're doing the thing. And then a little bit later, they're doing some digital shopping and my brother-in-law verbally said, kids are wearing Birkenstocks again? I was like, yes, they are. People are wearing Birkenstocks again, and they're wearing socks with them. So just so you know, that's the style. And he's like, oh, I don't get kids. And I was like, you are an old man. You're you've become an old man. And so this concept of being incarnational, right, of just being connected to the culture and being connected to the people, it's a biblical concept. And this is what we need to do for people. Who was really great at this is Paul, the Apostle Paul. And so looking at 1 Corinthians, this is what he says about this. He says, though I am free and belong to no one, I have made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but I am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. And that's what we're talking about today. We get in these situations really, really hard, and we're with people who do not know Jesus. And it's like, well, what do we do? We need to move towards them, maybe away from our preferences and move to connect with them. And we actually have this wonderful, there's lots of examples of this through the concept, we can get it, right? But there's examples of this all throughout the New Testament. And so we're going to look at one today. It's in Acts chapter 17. It's maybe one of my, I don't know if it's my favorite passage, but it's maybe top 5. And it's wonderful. And we're not going to go through the whole thing. I encourage you to go home, look through Acts 17. There's a ton to unpack, but to kind of give you some context to it, Paul's in Greece, and he's kind of on a missionary journey. He's sharing the gospel as he goes. And he goes to Thessalonica, right? We have some letters that Paul wrote to the Thessalonians that are in the New Testament, but he's in Thessalonica, and they're like a rough crowd, right? He shares the gospel with them. Some people do not like it, and they actually run him out of town. Like he has to escape town because they don't like his message. And then he goes to the next town of Berea, and the scripture, the New Testament even says, as we're reading in Acts, it says they were more noble than the Thessalonians, right? And so they're just a little more upscale. He shares the gospel with them. They're great. And then some Thessalonian thugs show up and run him off of that town as well. And so then we find him in Athens, and that's where we're going to pick up. Paul goes to Athens, and not just because we're in Athens, it's fitting, but he's in Athens. He's been run out of 2 towns, and this is where we pick up. He's waiting for his people to come with him, and so this is what we read. This is Acts chapter 17, verses 16 and 17. It says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. Now, those statements are meaningful. They're not wholly super remarkable, but I find some significance in there, because what you find is Paul came into this situation in Athens. He's been run off 2 places, right? He's probably feeling naturally a little at ease. Are these Thessalonians going to follow me here as well? What's going on? And he goes to the synagogue, right? He's Jewish. He goes to a place where Jewish people are. He moves towards what's comfortable for him. He's in Greece. So he goes oh, you're Jewish, I'm Jewish. Okay, this feels comfortable. And what we read earlier when he goes to Thessalonica, it says, as is his custom, he went to the synagogue. So this is like Paul's thing. He goes to a new city. He moves to a new city, and then he goes to the synagogue, where there's people that are like him. There's got to be this sense of comfort. And he comes to Athens, and he sees all these idols all over the town, and he's really bothered by it, and he immediately moves to what's comfortable. That, I'm being honest, that's not very different than me. When I get into a situation where I'm around people that I'm not necessarily comfortable with, sometimes it's new people, sometimes you get in a situation, I tend to move towards what's comfortable. I'll move to the person I know. I just move towards comfort, and Paul was no different in this. So he moves to what's comfortable. He begins to share the gospel, and he's talking that. While he's doing that, in Athens, it was just a place where there were a lot of philosophers and people like to share ideas, and they hear him talking, and it just confuses them. They love sharing ideas. Part of the reason they had so many idols is because it was like, if you believe this and this is your set of gods, okay, we're going to have a set of idols for your gods, and then you believe this, we're going to have a set of idols for your gods, and we're going to have a set of idols for your gods. We're just going to cover all the bases of everyone that's here. And so they hear Paul talking, and they're like, okay, this is new. We've not heard this before. And so they ask him, they say, hey, Paul, will you come with us to this kind of city center? You would know it as Mars Hill. That's like the common name. You see churches called Mars Hill, and it's real common. And so he's like, okay, yeah, you're curious. I have your ear. Now I'm bothered by everything I see. And so they bring him to Mars Hill, and they say this. In verse 19, we pick up, it says, May we know what this new teaching is that you're presenting. You're bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean. All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. All right, so Paul's got their ear. He's got their attention. And now he's got to decide what to do with it. Now, he's bothered by it, so, I'm just telling you, I get in situations talking to crazy Indian Jesus guy, and I just want to correct him and saying, like, you're wrong. Like, what are you're talking nonsense, man, right? Paul's got to choose. He can do that. He can take a lot of different paths here, but this is what he does. In Acts 17, verse 22, we pick up. He says, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing that you worship, and this is what I'm going to proclaim to you." Now, ignorant, that's probably a strong word. Other versions don't use that word. Basically, what he's saying is, hey, I see you're very religious. He starts with a compliment. Like, he's really bothered by what he's seeing, but instead of kind of knocking them or even ignoring it, he starts with a compliment and he finds some common ground. Like, hey, I see you're very religious. I'm really religious too. And this really I can tell this really matters to you. What you believe really matters. It matters to me too. And in fact, it matters so much that you've been very careful and you have this statue of the unknown God just in case. Well, I actually know this unknown God. Let me tell you about him. His approach is so brilliant. It's so connecting, and it's not judgmental, and it's beautiful. And then he begins to talk, and I'm going to highlight two verses. Verse 28, he says this. He begins to share the gospel, and he's not just complimenting and saying these things. He actually uses their language, and he says this. He says, "For in him we live and move and have our being." Now, again, that statement doesn't mean a lot to us, but primarily doesn't mean a lot to us because we were not Greek. And what Paul's doing is actually quoting a philosopher, a Greek philosopher. In his sharing of the gospel, he's quoting back to them one of the Greek philosophers. He's making this connection to them. And then he goes on and he says, as some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. And he's quoting another philosopher there. So even in his sharing of the gospel, he's making this connection back to them. He's not judgmental. He's just making this connection. And he's like, hey, let me share the gospel with you. And then he continues on. Again, I encourage you to read it. It's brilliant. But then in verse 32, it says, when they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some of them sneered. Because if we're being honest, it is a crazy thing, right? We forget, if you come to church, you've been a Christian for a while, you forget how crazy it is to say that someone died and came back to life. That just does not happen, right? We forget how crazy it is that Christmas is God coming to earth in the form of man. Like, for a person who does not believe that, that sounds crazy, right? So it's natural. Some of them sneered. But others said, we want to hear you again on this subject. We want to hear more. Can you tell us more? It piqued their interest. And they said, can you tell us more about this? And Paul, goodness gracious, if you know anything about Paul, you should just read the book of Acts. If you know anything about Paul, he has an incredible story. Can you tell us more about this person that raised from the dead? Paul can say, I met him on the road, and it changed everything about me. I had a life-altering experience with this Jesus. Let me tell you about him. And so it says, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. Isn't that the hope that we would have with our family and our friends and our neighbors that do not know Jesus? Wouldn't that be our hope? That we would be able to enter into some kind of conversation with them, and that however that conversation would end and however many conversations that would take, that we would eventually land in a place where they know and begin a relationship with Jesus? Wouldn't that be our goal? That should be our goal. But it's so hard. And Paul was just he's really good at it. And so today, I would like to give you some handles to hold on to, because this can be very conceptual. And I'd like to just give you some handles to hold on to. Paul, like I said, had an incredible story. He had an unbelievable story of his life, conversion story. And so, and if you're sitting here today and and you don't believe in Jesus, listen to this next part. One of the key things for us as a believer that we need to have as we're entering into conversations with whether it's family, friends, people who don't have a relationship with Jesus, especially as we're celebrating a holiday that is all about Jesus, so weird, is that we need to have a reason for our faith. Paul had a very solid reason for his faith. And in 1 Peter, we read this. It says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Always have a reason for your faith. So that means in your family gatherings and as you're going, and even today, and if you're sitting here and you don't have a relationship with Jesus, but someone invited you here, this is the thing. You can sit, like after church today, you can say like, hey, I'm just curious, do you have a reason that you like believe this stuff? Like, we should always have a reason for our faith, always have a reason for our hope. That reason we call our testimony. We all have one. We all have a story. We all have a reason for it. We got to see one today. We got to see Sydney. And that's one of the beautiful things that we do in our baptisms is that we share the reason for our faith before we get baptized. And honestly, that I just want you to know, inside, look, doing the video can be hard sometimes. And sometimes it's hard. We know people, they don't want to get baptized, not because they're like, sometimes it's scared to get in front of everyone. True. Right? Sometimes it's like, I don't know how to process my story. Oftentimes it's, I don't know what my family is going to think when they see my story. And just sharing that and letting their family kind of see in is so scary in many instances. But we always need to have a reason for our faith. We always need to have that. And so, if Christmas is the greatest story ever told, right? It's the beginning of the greatest story ever told. Your story is the second greatest story ever told. Your story is the second greatest story ever told. Right? We already know, hey, you don't believe in, like, we're celebrating Christmas and you don't believe this. You don't believe that, like, God came to earth, and you don't believe that Jesus is God, and you're not even sure if Jesus is real, right? And you can get into the history books. I can talk to this guy and talk about, like, hey, well, I don't think Jesus went to India, and here's all the reasons that we could talk about the semantics of it, but you know what's more powerful than that? Is what Paul did, sharing our story. Be like, yeah, I don't actually have an answer to the things that you're kind of objecting to, but let me share you my story. And this is how it plays out. It plays out like in simple, big ways, like, man, I was completely lost, and I had this life-altering salvation story. And sometimes you have that. I don't have one of those. I became a Christian when I was 8 years old, and I don't know how compelling my story of I grew up in the church. Right? Maybe it's compelling for someone who's trying to figure out how to raise their kids. We're like, hey, this was what for me. But some of our stories are like, hey, my finances were a mess. And I began to do my finances the way God tells us to do our finances. And we did the weirdest thing. We started giving 10% we didn't have like any money. We had like no money. At the end of the month, we had no money. We had $0. We had negative dollars. But we started giving 10% away. And like God did something miraculous in our finances. And like, He's blessed us beyond we could ever imagine, right? That's supernatural, and that's a story. And for a person who's struggling in their finances, that's compelling. That's super compelling. Personally speaking, one of my stories with my wife and I is we at one point years ago we both lost our jobs at the same time. We actually worked at a church, and we both lost our jobs. We got laid off, and it was not good, and we were not prepared well. And we were just trying to figure out how do we keep a roof above our heads. And our small group, they came around us, and they actually they paid our bills. And it was like this community and this amazing group of people that came around us because they knew Jesus, and because I'm just telling you, it was miraculous. And so and I'm talking to someone who is struggling with community, and they're like, I just feel so alone. Like, here's what God did in my life. I think that God could do that in your life too. That's compelling. Your story is worth sharing. Your story, I'm just telling you, in your family gatherings, that's one of the best things that you can do, is to share your story. And so, with that, because it's, we're talking about Christmas and whatnot, and holiday gatherings, and everyone follows recipes, I've created a testimony recipe for you to follow. And this is, you can do it lots of different ways. This is just one way. And hopefully it's helpful for you. Hopefully it gives you some handles on how you can do this. And so the very first step is to choose which story to tell. Your story is powerful, but you got to choose which story to tell. And as you do this, what you're going to find is there's going to be multiple stories. What I would suggest you do is think about that person in your life. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a neighbor, but you're like, this person, if I know them, and we're way better than Paul, right? Paul walked into like a blind situation with a whole group of people. He's like, they're Greek, I know that about them, right? But you may know your family members a lot better. And so you can think about that person. Who do I want to talk to? And what story do I think is about my life might connect with them? But you're going to decide, am I going to tell a story of salvation? Like, here's what my life was before, then I met Jesus, and here's how it is different now. Or you're going to tell a story of growth. And that story is, like I said, it could be a financial story, it could be a group story, it could be, you could just fill in the blank. How has God affected your life and made a difference in your life? And I'm telling you, it's supernatural. God has stepped in, and if you're like, God has not done anything for me, what are you doing? Why are you here? Like, God has affected all of us, and I'm just telling you, it takes some thinking through. So pick a story. Number 2, take time to prepare it and practice it and pray. Don't just like come up with it in your head, like, oh yeah, I guess this is my story. But actually prepare it. Write it down. And then practice it, like share it with people. It would be like one of my favorite days ever if we could get everyone in this room together and like, I don't even know how this would look or work, but we're all just around and we're just sharing stories of what God has done in our life. My goodness, it would be incredible. And it would be, and I know it would be, God did this in my life, and someone else would over here would say, yeah, me too. God did that in my life, and this is how it's changed my life. Oh, yeah, me too. And it would be incredible. We'd all be sharing. It's so encouraging. So take time to prepare it, but then practice it. Share it with some people. Get good at it. And then pray. Pray for an opportunity. And again, you may not even know, you might not have someone in mind, but ask God, hey, God, will you provide an opportunity for me to share this story? I believe he will. I absolutely believe he will, right? It might look different than you anticipate, but I'm just telling you, prepare, practice, and pray. And partially that because there's been too many times when I've been driving home from a conversation, and I'm like, man, I should have said that thing. I should have said that, and I just wasn't prepared. So having stories that you've already prepared, that are just in your back pocket, that you can pull out, and it's encouraging to you, it's encouraging to others, and it's incredible for people who need it. All right? Third thing, be curious and connect. Ask lots of questions. This is what Paul did so well. He became like the people he was talking to. So, I don't know what that looks like. Maybe you're sitting down, you're like, I'm talking to my uncle, and it's like, it's odd, but he's really into Beanie Babies lately. And he's just like, I don't know how to describe it. It's so weird. Okay, tell me about it. Like, dive into their story. Ask them. Right? This is where we get really, really curious about what's going on in people's lives. Because oftentimes we think we know what's going on in people's lives, but we don't actually take the time to really discover what's happening in their lives. Oftentimes we find that, hey, if I have gone through what you went through, I might actually be in the same spot you're in. But you're going to ask lots of questions. You're going to be really, really curious. And you're going to try to connect with them. Not just to be able to share your story. It's not like, oh, okay, I gave you 5 minutes. You get to talk. Now I get 5 minutes to talk, right? And I'm going to force Jesus down your throat. You're not doing that, but you're just waiting for your opportunity. And you do that by connecting. And you do that by asking questions. And you do that by being curious. Then, when the opportunity arises, is you share it confidently. You share your story confidently. All of you have a story. Share it confidently. This is what Romans 1:16 says. It says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. Your story can bring salvation. Your story can bring peace to someone. It can bring peace to you, but it can bring peace to the person that you share it with. And it's worth sharing. So when the opportunity arises, share it confidently, right? Sometimes we want to whisper the thing. And it's, have you ever talked to someone and it's like they tell you something and you're like, I don't even know that you believe what you just told me. Because you had no conviction in what you just said, right? Share it confidently. Because it's true. It's true. And then number 5 is you're going to invite them to take a step. Invite them to take a step. It's not just enough to connect with people. If you do that, you're just like a nice person, right? That's kind of nice. It's like, oh, wow, I connected with people. I got to know people more. But you're going to share your story confidently, and then you're going to invite them to take a step. Maybe it's coffee. It's like, hey, let's get together. Can we talk more about this? This is what we see with Paul, right? He's invited to come share, and then he shares, he tells the gospel at Mars Hill, and then people follow up, and they're like, hey, can we hear more? Some people sneer, but other people are saying, hey, can we hear more? And then they believed. And so this isn't a one and done. It's not like I shared my story, then boom, you're baptizing people in the neighbor's pool in 30-degree weather on Christmas Eve or something like that. Maybe that happens, I don't know, right? Probably not. But you invite them to take a step. Hey, let's have another conversation. Hey, let's keep in touch, and can we talk more about this? Right? Christmas Eve alone is coming up, and just statistically speaking, just so you know, it is of all the dates when people do surveys and study things like that, it's the time that people are most prone to say yes to a church invitation. More than Easter, more than anything else, probably because it's fun and everyone is kind of celebrating it. So take advantage of that. Invite them to take a step. Come with you to Christmas Eve. Go to lunch. Continue on. But invite them to take a step. And then I just want to leave you guys with this, just because this is just something that not just talking with people who I don't have anything in common with, who she's not dating him anymore, by the way. They broke up. But I have family members that I really, really, I lose sleep over. And that's real. And it's worth it. It's worth taking the risk to share your story and sharing your testimony, what God has done in your life. And I just want to leave you with this thought, like I've said, people may deny the Christmas story, right? People may deny the Christmas story, but no one can deny your story when your story is a lifestyle. When you're talking to somebody and you're like, hey, I know you don't believe this, but let me just tell you how this actually literally plays out in my life. This happens with diets all the time, doesn't it? Right? In January, many of us are going to be online and we're going to be like, oh, wow, I found this person. They lost a ton of weight. Well, how'd they do it? Like, stood on their head 30 minutes a day. And the weight just like fell off them. And you're like, oh, well, they do look skinnier. So I guess I'll try that. I'll stand on my head for 30. If it works, it works, This is what we're building towards. It's like, hey, they don't believe all this stuff that we're celebrating with Christmas. But when you share your story and it's like, here's how it actually plays out in my life, you can't deny that. Some of you have your story, you're so different than you were before. You're so different than you were 6 months ago. It's crazy. It's worth sharing that. And that's something that people cannot deny. It's supernatural. I'm going to pray for us, and then I got a couple things I want to tell you about, and we're out. God, thank you so much. Thanks for sending your son. Thanks for coming to earth to be like us, to know us, to be around us, and then and dying for us. Yeah, thanks for Christmas. And I just know that some of us in this room, it's like some of us are extremely lucky, and when we go to family gatherings and we get around other people, it's like everyone we're around, they love Jesus, and it's really amazing. But then others of us, we're not so lucky. We have individuals in our family that don't know you. And then some of us, when we go to family gatherings, we're the only person that believes in Jesus. We're the only person following Jesus. And that's hard. God, and that will steal our peace. But God, help us to share our story. Help us to share our reason for faith in you and bring peace to others through the gospel. God, you're incredible. I thank you for what you've done in our lives. I just thank you what you're going to do in this season. You're incredible. We love you. Amen.